Hey, and welcome to episode 15 of One Step Beyond, a show about positively engaging with the world outside our door. My name's Tony Fletcher. In the regular world, I write, primarily about music, which I also play to some extent.
Tony, why don't we have you take the lead, and I'll go behind, we'll go single file, and if I see you going in a very, very awkward direction, I might say something, but otherwise this will be your first natural navigation experience.
If you listened to the last episode about Ollie Hunter Smart's walk all the way down India, you may just remember that among the several things I talked about, one was that I was recording just before Election Day, hoping that US democracy would survive a great test. And as of today, which is Veterans Day incidentally, 8 days after that election, it would appear that democracy has survived, well, at least one test, namely that the American people voted to keep it, but we have a few more streams to forge before we get to welcome in a new president and hopefully start repairs after 4 years of a national and international nightmare. You may also remember from the last episode's introduction my saying that, given that this show has a motto about getting outside your comfort zone to enrich your life, it was time I stopped just doing Zoom interviews with people who are very, very good at that, and did the same thing for myself. And so, on the morning of Election Day itself, Tuesday, November 3rd, I took an early morning drive to the heart of the Catskill Mountains to meet up with a chap called Ken Posner so we could bushwack our way up Rusk Mountain. Ken is a pretty amazing individual, as you're about to hear, with a few incredible athletic achievements to his name. But we're not going to discuss those. At least not now, except to the extent that his athleticism has sent him on a steady journey towards increased minimalism, by which I don't just mean he does most of these endeavours barefoot. Ken also likes to go without food, without drink, without a certain amount of clothing, and is especially keen on going without technology. Consider it maybe trekking without tech, or natural navigation. Any which way, at the start of a process still ongoing, when so many of us were constantly reaching for our phones or our browsers, our TV remotes or our car radio buttons for election updates, it seemed all too ideal that Ken and I should put our devices in airplane mode, and instead rely on our memory of the maps we'd looked on in advance, our internal compasses and navigation system instincts to get us all the way up a mountain that has no discernible trail. And to do all of that in a single morning, because I had a very important music rehearsal that afternoon which I could not miss. Now, for Ken, this was second nature, pun somewhat intended. For me, though, it was a decent step outside my comfort zone. Obviously, I know the Catskills. I love them. But as you'll hear in a moment, I've done very little bushwhacking and had certainly not been up Rusk before. Nor am I used to hiking these days without a dependency on technology and a bag packed with food and water. Along the way, we talked in depth about stepping back from these modern-day dependencies, which involved a deep discussion about a certain character from ancient Greece whose name I had never heard of until a few weeks back, even though he's the founder of a modern form of thinking that enters our conversation every single day. So, while the morning out was exercise, it was also education, both in the field itself, meaning navigating our way up and down the mountain, and in terms of what I learned from Ken and about Ken along the way. One caveat is that unlike the recent episodes, like when I was running alongside Bill Hoffman, or the initial documentary about our climb up Mount Kilimanjaro, Ken and I were in single file, and you can hear us trudging through the snow. Oh, did I mention it had snowed in early November? Yeah, it had snowed. We were climbing in the snow. As such, there were limitations on what my trusty Zoom recorder could capture. And if those limitations aren't apparent on the show that follows, it means I've dumped the offending audio. I am so glad that we set this day up together. It's probably one of the benefits of this show, that occasionally I get to put a date in my calendar to get me out doing something new and challenging and exciting and rewarding. You might be engaged in a kind of similar endeavor yourself right now, in which case, more power to you. But if you're not, that's fine as well. Whether you're sitting back on the sofa, making your dinner, lying in bed, out on a walk, a hike, a climb, a run, a bike ride, or if you're in a car driving to your destination, well, hopefully we're all putting our technology to good use and also making the most of our natural lifestyles. And so, with all of that, I invite you to tune in and join Ken and myself as we prepare to go
one step beyond.
So just one final thing before we kill ourselves up and check we've got what we need and especially what we don't need. What elevation are we at now, and what is the top of Rusk?
So Rusk is 3686.
That's a reasonable height.
And we're around, call it 2200 right now.
Okay. The height of Rusk puts it in a certain collector's set amongst the Catskill Mountains. There are 3,500 foot peaks, which I always think is rather nice of God to give us that even kind of number. And a bunch of them are trails, and I've done pretty much all of those bar one. I've had the printout sheet as somehow, this is amazing, it stayed on my desk for about 15 years.
Yep.
I have photographed it a couple of times, but somehow I still have it. I am so slow at doing what we call the bushwhacks, primarily because I enjoy what I have in my calendar. It's not, if I die without doing all 35, it won't be, it won't kill me. I'll be dead. However, it would be nice to tick another one off. But these ones, they have canisters up top so that you can eventually demonstrate you were there and say, I was here on this date, I signed. So it's not enough for us just to say, oh, I think we summited. We have to find the canister. Right. Exactly. This is part of what makes hiking in the Catskills fun. A lot of people set out to become part of the 3500 Club, which is what I'm referring to there, where you gradually tick off all the mountains. By the way, you also have to reclimb for particular mountains in winter, so it's 39 in all. And then you get a badge or a certificate, or you just get bragging rights. You would be amazed how many people take this on. People do ask me, bushwhacking, does that mean you're literally scything your way through bushes? I mean, a lot of people ask me that.
Scything with like a saw, you mean? Or...
Well, yeah, with a scythe, you literally bring in a knife.
No, you're not allowed to do that. That would be destroying the natural environment. You have to fit yourself through the environment. You're not there to build a road or a trail.
And also with bushwhacking, we're doing it in early winter, and there's a sense to that because people think, oh, the summer's a nice time to hike, and I can tick off some of those bushwhacks. But that's when the trees, of course, are at their thickest. The leaves are at their thickest. You're going to get waxed most by trees, and you're going to struggle to see any path underneath.
You also have the stinging nettles that can sting you, and you have cow parsnip that can give you a rash, and more berry bushes with more thorns. So there's pluses and minuses in each season. I like the summer.
You do like the summer.
I like being warm and not carrying as much gear and going barefoot. And so the winter is not my favorite time of year, but then nature also makes sure you understand, if you get out there enough, you make sure you understand the full range of experiences. It's not all joy and comfort and easiness. It's difficulty and pain as well. It's
so inevitable pros and cons, but you do like bushwhacking in summer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know a lot of people
Unless I get stuck on something that's nasty.
Take it from me, Ken is not the kind of person who looks like he gets stuck very easily. Anyway, by this point, we had reached an elbow in the trail, because actually for the first quarter mile, half mile, we were on a trail. It's one that leads up as an option to Hunter Mountain. But at this point, that trail veered off to the right, and Rusk very clearly was to our left. We would have to descend down a little bit, cross a stream, and then figure out the best way to climb it.
And your listeners, if they were here, they would be able to see that there's not much you can really see besides forest and the slope heading up. Now we want to stay on the ridge between two streams. There's a stream on the right and there's another one across this spur on the left. So it's not a complicated mission. We need to keep moving upwards.
So I see this stream that people could hear.
That's right.
We're going to cross that one. It's forking here. Is that right? Is it forking?
We're going to cross these two little streams where they fork,
okay,
and then head up on that spur. And we're just going to keep going upwards, making sure not to divert to either side into a stream bed. And then when we get to the top, we'll look to the left and keep following the uphill grade, and that'll get us to the top of Rusk.
Given that this is a relatively common adventure that people have in the Catskills, I am presuming, but I might be wrong, and the weather may help us or hinder us, that there is some kind of path that might emerge that shows people have been before us.
Well, that's right. And if you look behind you, you'll see there it is.
Yeah.
So part of the techniques of navigating around here in the wilderness naturally, that is without maps, compass, GPS, is to look for signs of people who've been here before us. And so some of the most beautiful trails in the Catskills are the so-called social trails that have emerged on common or popular routes. And sometimes they're very obvious and sometimes they're very subtle. Today we have fresh snowfall and a lot of leaves down. So the trail may be hidden for us, but also we'll find that some places there's just an absence of obstructions. Those branches that would slap you in the face, somebody maybe has already snapped it off. So sometimes you can follow these trails just by being observant and very attuned to how the terrain in front of you is a little bit different from the terrain to the side. Right. So that's the theme, is observation and paying attention instead of just blundering along in a rush and
Good.
and dependent on devices.
And to some degree, what you just described sounds a lot like tracking. I mean, it's like, when people track animals,
Absolutely.
you're looking for signs that humans have been this way.
Exactly.
Yeah, great. All right. Well,
So, Tony, why don't we have you take the lead, and I'll go behind. We'll go single file, and if I see you going in a very, very awkward direction, I might say something, but otherwise, this will be your first natural navigation experience.
Thank you, he says, cautiously.
Oh, one more comment.
Yeah.
And this is perfect timing, so thank you to the clouds that just parted. There's the sun. And so I checked. Now, again, it's not about abandoning technology. It's about using it more selectively. So I did check before we leave, and between 8:30 and 9, which is about right now, the sun should be shining right in the direction we want to go. So there it is behind our shoulder, and it's disappearing again. But it's a great way to keep oriented to the extent we can see it. And now the sun will move during the course of the morning. By noon, it will be due south. We're heading north-northwest.
Mm-hmm.
So it won't be quite right. On the way down, the sun will be a little bit to our right instead of face on, because it moves.
It does. Well, we move.
But
Earth
for now, and then it's gone. Now the cloud's so thick you really can hardly see where it was. But it does give us that orientation that we're heading up the mountain.
As we started climbing up through the snow, finding our way between the trees, me holding onto my Zoom recorder with one hand, I learned more about Ken's life. He says he wasn't always the outdoors type. He grew up in Chicago, so nature wasn't completely at hand. But it was once he got to college. And after college, he went into the army for 3 years, was in the infantry, and clearly that did something for him. I noticed he speaks in military jargon quite a lot. He describes his work these days as a corporate bee, and I guess he gets out of that hive mentality by getting outside and relying on his own instincts. To this end, he has a pretty long history of distinct achievements. In 2013, he set what was then the fastest known time for running the long path, 350 odd miles of trails that lead from Albany to New York City, or the other way, covering that distance in 9 days. He then wrote a very good book about what he learned from his journey, entitled, accurately enough, Running the Long Path. The following year, Ken achieved what is still apparently the fastest known time for the Badwater Double, for which he ran the 146 miles from the lowest point on the continental US, Badwater Basin, 280 feet below sea level, to the highest point of the continental US, Mount Whitney, which is at 14,505 feet above sea level. And given that you can't exactly call a cab from the summit of Whitney, he promptly ran all the way back to base, covering those 292 miles in 4 days. He wrote an essay about that for Marathon and Beyond magazine that you can read online, and it's full of the kind of references, sources, and nutritional information you'd normally expect from a medical journal. Perhaps not surprisingly, for someone who's clearly as intelligent as they are athletic, Ken is a fan of Greek philosophers, with a special predilection for one, let's call him cult figure in particular. So, who was Diogenes, and why should we care?
Well, Diogenes was a colorful character who, an ancient Greek philosopher, if you can call him that. His nickname was the dog. and Plato called him Socrates gone mad, because he took many of the ideas and pushed them to the logical extreme and perhaps the illogical extreme.
To summarize somewhat and spare you the sound of us trudging through the snow, Diogenes was born on the Black Sea coast of modern-day Turkey, what was then Asia Minor, in the waning days of the 5th century BC. He and his father minted currency for a living and apparently got themselves in some trouble for doing some of it fraudulently. Sent into exile, Diogenes went to Athens by way of Delphi, where he consulted the oracle, which told him to continue to deface the currency. That was, however, apparently a play on words, given that currency also referred to the norms of the times. And so, Diogenes showed up in Athens, penniless and possessionless, and proceeded to do exactly that.
He lived in a tub, and he ate and slept in the square, and he hung out with the dogs. That's where he got the nickname of the dog. And he believed that he came to the conclusion that people should behave more like dogs. In other words, live naturally. And it wasn't so much an argument with technology, because there wasn't a lot of technology back then, there wasn't as much. It was an argument about sort of unnecessary customs and practices. So he thought there was no need to be ashamed of natural functions like eating and sleeping and going to the bathroom. The dogs aren't embarrassed by that stuff. Why should people be ashamed of it? So he practiced what he preached. He lived out in the public square. He had only 4 possessions. These were a cloak, a satchel, a staff, and a vase, a drinking vase to drink water. One day he saw a child drinking water from a stream with cupped hands, so he threw away the vase.
Oh gosh.
He was more of somebody who would get in your face. So he wasn't pretending to be holier than thou. He just called out people for what he thought was unnecessary bullshit.
Considering himself as but a dog, Diogenes thought nothing of urinating and defecating in public, and indeed masturbating too. I don't know that this explains why, according to history, he was captured by pirates, sold into slavery, and eventually found himself in the city of Corinth, where Alexander the Great came across him and said, "I've heard of you. You're Diogenes. I will grant you a wish." To which Diogenes reputedly retorted, "Then get out of my light." And as perhaps the legend of that interaction will confirm, Diogenes was a lot more influential in history than your typical town square vagabond.
And he's considered one of the founders of the Cynic school of philosophy. And the Cynics are critics of the modern world, and they're advocates of simplicity.
Cynicism, I've always taken to be a negative word. A cynic to me is somebody who's kind of, sees the glass as half empty. A cynic's always looking for the negative in a scenario. That's how I view cynicism. So I'm somewhat. Is my interpretation incorrect?
That's the modern use of the word. Cynic actually is ancient Greek for dog. So the philosophy is named after Diogenes, and so it's. But even not going all the way back to ancient Greece, other people have pointed out that how you interpret cynicism depends on who you are. Ambrose Bierce was an American author in the 19th century. He defined cynicism as, quote unquote, seeing things as they are instead of as they're supposed to be.
Well, that I understand. That's a degree, so attached to that, we might say a degree of cynicism is healthy.
That's right. What we don't like is when somebody becomes jaded, and then they're no longer cynical at that point. They're just negative.
It's additionally worth noting that while in Corinth, Diogenes passed his, I guess we'll call it his philosophy, onto Crates, who himself fashioned it into what we now call Stoicism. And it occurred to me after we got off the mountain that many of us who do yearn for a more simple life perhaps feel that if we live by that yearning, we won't make our mark on the world. And yet here we are talking about Diogenes several thousand years after his life and death, as someone who's responsible for two different schools of thought. And Ken and I also got into some good discussions about Thoreau and Muir and other people who made the decision to live very, very simple lives and similarly are remembered and indeed heralded for it. Now, you may be wondering what on earth Diogenes has to do with our day on the mountain, but most likely you've connected the dots between Diogenes' simple way of living and Ken Posner's simple minimalist way of approaching outdoor adventure. Now, the Diogenes challenge, is that out there in the world of sort of activities, or is it something you came up with?
Well, it is. I guess it is now, possibly. It's just something I came up with, and it was sort of inspired by Diogenes. It's inspired by the idea of how do you take on a challenge in the Catskills, a course of whatever you'd like to do, but do it in a way that's more natural and less reliant on gear. So that was, so he was the inspiration for it. And actually I came up with the idea, and I decided that the goal was to do the 9 peaks, which is a 19-mile circuit, and half of it is bushwhacking through some of the thicker, the fir thickets that we went around. You have no choice but to go through. And so I thought the real way to do that in a natural manner was to do it without map or compass, navigating naturally, no food or water, barefoot.
No food or water?
No food or water, and barefoot.
Wow. So I'm going to interrupt and just say, was Diogenes also somebody who would habitually go without food and water of choice?
I don't know. We don't know enough about him, really. But I think that was common in terms, if you talk about the Greek practice of ascesis, and it's common in many cultures to go long distances or to go without food or water, or to expose yourself to the elements, the heat and the cold. I think that's a common, you go without food or water or sleep, right? You're pushing the envelope in your capabilities and forcing yourself to manage physical stress, and I think those themes are common around the world, right? You know, the Japanese marathon monks,
who we discussed just 2 episodes ago, actually.
So they incorporated some of those kinds of practices, very limited food and water. I think at the end of their practice, don't they have to do a 9-day fast? Or I've studied, Indian tribes like the Yuraks who have traditional forms of training that involve elements. You're subjecting yourself to stress to train yourself to manage the stress, to make yourself stronger physically and mentally, and also to discover where limits are and where they aren't.
So you came up with the Diogenes challenge, as you said, 9 peaks, and how many hours, and did you do it solo?
Well, I should say, so I came up with this challenge. It's not 9 peaks over 19 miles, and no food or water, except what you find along the way. You're allowed to take a drink from the stream, or even use your filter if you're, but not carrying water. And navigating naturally. But then I decided it was too hard. I didn't want to do it.
Looked good on paper.
It looked good on paper. I was like, I'll get around to it. But then my friend Cal Ghosh, I mentioned it to him, and he was like, so when are we going to do it? And then I had no choice.
And so, this past June, Ken and his friend Cal completed their own self-set Diogenes challenge. And as Ken said, they did it without taking additional food and water. Ken did the whole thing barefoot. As a point of interest, he was not barefoot on our climb up at Rusk, although he said he could have done that but didn't want to put too many stresses on himself because he was running a marathon this following weekend. And also, although Ken took a camera with him on his Diogenes challenge, that was it for technology.
Technology is great up to a point, but technology has costs as well as benefits. And if you go in a direction of always more technology, you end up sort of in a narrow spot where you've reduced your exposure to the world and you're in a safe little hole, and it makes you very productive at what you do at work, but you lose out on so much of the rest of a natural experience and a natural life.
And I'm as guilty as anybody of taking devices with me and measuring what I do, and having maps, and just being way too reliant on on technology to do things that are essentially about getting back into nature.
Exactly, and it's I call myself a minimalist, not a primitivist. So I'm not trying to actually go back in time and reenact a Paleolithic lifestyle, but it's more about experimenting with the variables and what technology brings you. And when you go too far, you get the weakness and the cost of technology with questionable benefits, and then you may be worse off. So, for example, eating, right? Now, eating's important, and today you're not carrying food with you, and I skip breakfast, which is my normal practice when I'm out in the field. And in days gone by, people went for days without food, and they were able to manage that and deal with it. But in today's world, we have so much food and so much sugary food that most people have become accustomed to grabbing a snack whenever they feel the slightest twinge of hunger, and as a result, they lose the ability to burn fat and to manage themselves and power themselves without a constant supply of sugar or carbohydrates. And we see the side effects in the unfortunate prevalence of diabetes and obesity and cardiac issues and other problems, dementia and cancer. These are all theorized to be associated with too much sugar and carbohydrates.
Right.
So one of the principles of minimalism, if you're going to incorporate that into your training, is to test what you can do without the power bars or the Gatorade or the food that you need. And
So part of your minimalism is let's stay with the food part for now, the food and drink. Any caffeine?
I do drink coffee, absolutely.
Did you have coffee this morning?
I did.
All right, so you've had liquid. Any additional water?
I had a glass of water as well.
Okay, but no food?
No.
Okay. Ken already knew that I'd had some breakfast this morning because he'd asked me. And although I knew that part of our day ahead was meant to be predicated on the idea of fasting, amongst other minimalism, I have to be honest and say that knowing that I had this important work in the afternoon, I didn't want to just find myself utterly exhausted, empty, and potentially having bonked. I call this show One Step Beyond, but it's also just taking things one step at a time. And as Ken admits, the different restrictions he puts on himself, going barefoot, going without food and water, going without navigation tools, are all just different stressors that combined can make for a greater whole.
So there's a special thrill when you put yourself a little bit farther out there and you discover your innate capabilities, because there's a thrill to being strong, not in a macho sense, but in the sense of being in control and having the capability to manage yourself. And that's, I think nature programmed us to want to be like that and to feel excitement and enthusiasm as we get stronger and better at things. So I think these capabilities all sort of, on the one hand, they can seem very hardcore and machoistic, or on the other hand, they just develop naturally out of the enthusiasm of being outdoors. John Muir was as close to an ultra runner as there was in 19th century America. He used to go out for days on end with almost no food, bring a crust of bread with him. He didn't wear a coat in the fall in the mountains. He covered huge distances. I mean, he didn't divide between running and walking. He just moved at a rapid pace, up or down or sideways. And he did that out of a great feeling of love and excitement and awe for nature, which is where he saw the, in his words, the hand of God.
Mm-hmm.
So all this stuff is inherent in us if you just give it a chance. And so, your show is very interesting because this need to step out of the comfort zone. We were talking about technology and how it shields you. So if you were to go back in time to our distant ancestors, there was no comfort zone, right?
Yeah.
The comfort zone only exists today because we have the luxury of technology and gear and resources, and it's all great, and it makes us extraordinarily productive, but now you have a comfort zone and you can get stuck in it.
Exactly. I'm going to make a personal observation here, which is the sun just came back out and there's snow on the ground, and
we didn't bring our sunglasses.
Well, we didn't bring our sunglasses. That sort of occurred to me, a little late now, but what is occurring to me is just how beautiful it is. And I think a lot of people might just think, oh, hiking in winter in the snow, that's inherently more dangerous, less fun. I don't know, it's just the beauty of the snow on the ground, feeling your feet kind of crunching it, especially when the sun comes out, is there's a reason that a lot of people do love hiking in winter.
Now, it's not that this area is particularly beautiful, it's just natural, right?
And we're not talking of which, there's that deer prints, deer.
That looks like deer prints.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, carry on, please.
So this is a natural environment, and for many people, a natural environment creates a feeling of joy. So my point is that an unnatural environment does not create a feeling of joy. So the office, the shopping mall, even home, these are unnatural environments, and they may not provide us the stimuli that we need to experience life fully.
There's a lot of truth to this, for sure. When we travelled as a family 4 years ago, I was aware how locals would come out to climb mountains, to go anywhere for a view, to get into nature whenever they could. There's clearly something innate about the human experience, where this calls to us. We seem to have the same appreciation for sunrises and sunsets and just vistas of beauty. Anyway, all of that said, we were enjoying our own beauty, and I did observe that Ken had got a backpack just in case. I guess he had backup supplies just in case we really needed something. I was keeping everything in my pockets, including the spikes for our shoes, which we actually didn't need. We were both wearing Innovates, and they're pretty well suited for mountains, and I guess we both had experience of staying on our feet. To that end, there was something else we didn't use either. We're not doing this with poles, despite the steepness.
Well, poles, yeah, people have used staffs for a long time. I have a mixed attitude towards poles. I don't like to use them because for me they become crutches. I put too much weight on them and lean on them, and I'd rather use my balance. So one of the things that barefoot teaches, or hiking in rough terrain, it improves your sense of balance and agility. And so I have two poles with me all the time. They're my left and my right arms. So if I need them, I can bend down and put a hand on the ground. It's a little bit cold with the snow. So I don't like to use the poles, but I do use them. I was hiking in the Sierra this summer.
In the where, sorry?
I was hiking in the Sierra.
Okay.
I went out and did the John Muir Trail, and I used the poles. So I was carrying a pack which was heavier than I normally carry, and they're helpful, particularly going uphill.
As far as clothing for the hike, I've gotten pretty good over the years at figuring out what I should wear in cold weather. And that actually means not too much, because you don't want to work up a sweat. All that said, I felt the need to take off an item after a while, and stopped to do so. So did Ken. Difference was, he didn't have anything on underneath. I should point out to listeners, you're not going to get away without a photo. When I said we were going to just strip down a bit, you just took everything off your top layer. You're now wearing a backpack and shirtless.
That's right. And part of, historically, Indians used to, at least in some tribes, go about shirtless. That was their uniform. And it's an interesting, to me it's interesting because what I want to do by going shirtless is train myself to manage the discomfort of a chilly breeze, but not put myself into hypothermic conditions. So if it gets too cold or too windy, and of course the wind just picked up, I can put all sorts of warm things back on. But I do like going shirtless, and I feel like there must be a thermostat located somewhere on my chest, and my body actually knows what to do in cold air. It knows how to warm itself. There's some people who are really, really good at managing the cold. There's a Dutchman called the Iceman, Wim Hof. And
Just about to ask you if you followed him.
oh, sure.
Chances are you've heard of Wim Hof as well. I'm sure you've seen his pictures. He's the Iceman. He's the guy who climbs mountains in shorts, takes long, long ice baths, holds the world record for time under ice. Looks like he's doing very well for himself, and his philosophy has made him a lot of money too, which is great. Doesn't seem to be spending it on clothes though.
So training in the cold is another element of you can call it minimalistic or whatever you want. It's another way to train yourself to manage stress and manage your body safely. What's nice about training in the cold, or using the cold as a training stressor, is it doesn't put any pressure on joints and muscles and tendons and ligaments. See, there's a lot of ways to train yourself. Running is a great way to train yourself, but you can overdo it, right?
Yeah, of course.
So there's all these different ways that you can run. You can run for distance, you can run for speed, you can run barefoot, you can run in the heat, you can run in the cold, you can go without food, you can go without water. And you pick these strategies depending on what you're trying to do and what you feel you should train yourself for. But they all follow a similar pattern, which is you discover that you can do with less than you thought. You can be more self-reliant than you thought. And there's a great joy and thrill of self-reliance when you do these things.
And with that, it's back to navigation. So we're at a point where I'm not totally clear. You've got me in the lead still, and I'm not totally clear. Going uphill is just right here, which seems logical. You know, there was a part of me that could follow over, but I'll be going over to the other stream, and I think you told us we don't want to cross that stream right now. So, is that correct?
I think we've got a choice here. We can see where the trail shows up again. Right now it's disappeared under the snow. Or we can just stay to the right and keep heading uphill. We got to step over some logs. But
so, when you say we can see the trail, are we talking over here?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, you can see it just winding its way up there.
Okay, we're looking at the same thing. All right, that's good news. To be clear about it, when we're talking of a trail here, we just mean some form of clearing through the woods. So my instinct is to be cautious and stick with a trail, which would suggest we sort of head left at this point to cross the creek and then pick up that trail that we can see.
Let's do it. By the way, the sun has come out, and it's still behind us. Now, it's going to be moving over to our left, so we don't want to keep it exactly behind us, but it's going to be broadly behind us, and we're going uphill, so we're executing according to plan. You're doing a great job, Tony.
All compliments appreciated. And while I really do encourage you to get out and do something similar, it should be said at least both of us have some experience in the mountains, in snow, and on this kind of terrain.
Here, for your listeners who can't see what we're doing, the ground is littered with rocks and down trees and all sorts of debris. And so each step becomes a little bit of a judgment, and it's not always stable, particularly with snow. So we're looking for the easiest way to move across this terrain without trashing ourselves.
Right, in other words, just saying a compass will send you straight uphill. And we don't need to go straight uphill as long as we know, it's almost a bit like skiing. You've got a fall line, but you zigzag around that fall line. And I guess to some degree you're suggesting, you've got an up line, but you crisscross it to just do switchbacks to avoid.
That's right, and you want to, there's some basic math involved, but it depends how much steep you want to do. And steep in the Catskills, again, you'll never need ropes. It's not like alpine mountaineering. But going up steep cliffs, coming out of stream beds, where you have tilting, slippery rocks covered with moss and dead leaves, that's not necessarily an easy time. And you'll have a more graceful journey if you avoid those kinds of obstacles, and the compass just takes you straight.
Okay. from experience, was that part of the steepest of it we're just finishing off now?
That's part of the steepest, but there's also a band of ledges around the summit, so we'll
Okay.
have to weave our way through some slabs.
Okay, so we got another tough
But
section.
this is still steep in front of us. It'll be like this until we get onto the crest
Okay.
of the ridge. You often find the Catskills, they start out not too bad, and then they have the steep section.
Right.
And then they roll over at the top. So we're still in the
Yeah.
middle of the S, if you will.
And sure enough. So we got some ledges here. I can see the terrain is changing somewhat. By ledges,
These are sandstone slabs that are broken apart. And it's not that they're huge cliffs or anything like that, but we're getting into a zone with a lot of large broken rocks. So it's a little bit of scrambling. It's slower. It's slippery. It's challenging in a really annoying kind of sense, but as we were saying, it's the kind of challenge that can burn up your concentration and your sense of control. And so that's why the key is to go slowly and look around and say, okay, here's this pile of rocks in front of me. What's the easiest way to go? The gentlest way on myself. Because when you're scrambling and your feet are slipping and you're getting mad, that tires you out as much as moving your feet, if not much more.
yeah, for sure.
So let's see what we did. I'm not looking at the altitude reading on my watch, but I can see green ahead of us. That's
Right.
fir and spruce. So we know we're getting into the boreal zone, and that's typically pretty close to 3,500 feet.
Okay.
And I know it is on Rusk because I saw the mountain on the drive in. So that tells us we're on the final push to the top.
As it turned out, we were probably a little below 3,500 feet. Given the amount of climbing we found we still had left after this. One of the things about going up these mountains is, it's the old, it's just around the corner. You do really tend to think you must be almost there.
Oh, let's put you back in charge, Tony.
Thank
We're
you.
almost there, but as you pointed out, we're not at the canister. So let's put you in charge to find the canister. So go up and look for little trails that will lead you to it. We're not there yet, but we're getting close. We missed some of the garbage over there. I don't literally know. I can guess where on the map we are, but I don't know for sure. So I'll be interested to see the track later, because this is a different feel for the last time I was up here.
Right.
Last time, but times before, I followed the herd path that weaves right between the slabs. But this time we went around to the left.
Well, you're telling me that, and I can still see elevation ahead of us.
Yeah, that's what you're going to look for, Tony. Just keep going up, and as we get onto the top, the up is going to become more subtle,
Right.
right? So you're going to be looking for inches instead of feet.
For all Ken's experience and expertise, we had but reached another false summit. Ahead of us, I see off to our left, I'm looking at what looks like a wall of slabs, like you say, not insurmountable. But as I look over to my left here, Ken, I see they end. It looks that way.
Let's do it.
Okay. So yeah, we'll come up and then around. So I'm going to take the lead again. And trust you'll correct me if you need to. Fortunately, that proved unnecessary.
Well, you picked a very nice spot through the slabs, Tony. Good job.
Yeah, I could see it.
This might well be the trail. You'll find these trails that tend to end up picking a nice track sometimes. People run with their feet. In fact, it looks like we're on it.
I feel, yeah, I feel like, we should be close to a peak. And yes, this feels like it's opened up.
Here would be the challenge. If we were going up an endless ridge, we might get to level spots, and it would just be a pause on the way, still going up.
Yeah, and
we know where we're going. So.
there's still a little bit more. Endless sort of false summits.
Well, we said that was the one set of slabs you had to get through, and then there was another one, and now here's a third.
Yeah, never trust Ken.
No. But I told you, there's a tendency to think you will before you're there.
Especially, I mean, the Catskills are great at that because because they're all below the tree line. You often just think, oh, I'm rounding off, we're here, and you can't see the summit. You see some flat up ahead of you, and you think that's it.
See, for your listeners, the challenge again is not that this is a naked, exposed peak in the Alps or the Sierra, but you have the challenge of piles of boulders and rocks with thick vegetation. So it makes it hard to see where you're going, and you've got challenging places to step. You're never exactly sure what's underneath your feet. That's the sort of unique challenge of this terrain.
Yeah, and we're definitely up against some slabs, and this time I think I'm angling to the right of them, but at the same time I think we may just need to go up this time. I see a path up here. Actually, it looks like possibly the path.
I think, yep.
Third time lucky. Well, there's some kind of animal has decided to take it.
Okay.
That's the only footprints I see, and they're disappearing now. I'm also feeling the wind.
That's right.
And the chill more, which suggests again that we're starting to expose ourselves.
But it's nice down in the trees. The trees do shelter us, and you can look at the. We didn't follow the exact compass route to the top. We steered to the right, and now we're making our way back to the left. And we do that to avoid the steep sections.
Now, off to our left, it's going to go down a little bit. So, in terms of finding a canister and a summit, my personal sense is it should be around here. And I'm going to spare you the squeal of delight. I found it when I found it. Listening back, it really didn't feel that dramatic, to be honest, and didn't justify the squeal. But whatever, it's a nice feeling to spend a couple of hours climbing up in the snow, and then you finally do realize you must be at the summit, and somewhere there on the trunk of a tree, you find attached to that trunk the orange canister that says Rusk Mountain, and now you are here and you've achieved your goal. Well, you are now being filmed at the canister. I'm just going to film our last few steps in, because it's quite a nice satisfaction. This is it.
Now we have a problem that sometimes these canisters get frozen shut.
Which is probably just as well that I'm filming.
I don't want to break it from the bracket.
Wow, I didn't think about that.
I think if you get a photographic shot, that would be good.
It says
I'll
Rusk.
get a picture of you too, so we'll be able to document this when it comes time to get you your 3500 patch.
That little digital sound that you may have heard, that was my phone video switching off. Ironically, without taking technology with us, we'd have had no proof that we had actually made it to the top of this bushwack, the canister being frozen shut. There was, without any doubt, quite a satisfaction at doing this. I mean, it's not on a par with climbing a Kilimanjaro, but in terms of actually being able to do something without navigational tools, without real guides, without the technology, without maps, without compasses, just following your instincts, yeah, it felt good. Now all we had to do was get down again.
So let me give you a quick test. Suppose we weren't going to follow, we didn't have footprints.
Yeah.
How would you orient yourself? Because you could turn around, and there are actually trails going that way, and to East Rusk, and over to Evergreen or Pack Saddle, whatever it is that way. There's at least trails going at least 3 different directions, if not 4. And so how would you orient yourself to start heading back if you didn't have the footprints?
I would know that the sun is moving from east to west, and it's not going to get high up in the sky at this time of year. I suspect it's late morning. The clock's changed, which means that if it's 11 o'clock now, it would have been 12 o'clock 2 days ago, and the sun is going to be largely due south. If I was doing this without you, Ken, I would have taken, hopefully if I was prepared, a good look at the map to figure whether, well, you told me we were heading north-northwest, so we are not looking to go absolutely due south. So I'm going to go back down the hill, keeping the sun to my right.
Exactly.
And in a way, depending on how long it takes us, the more we go down, the more the sun should be sort of a bit further to our right, because the sun's going to be moving west. So that would be my philosophy.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's good. All right, should we head back and get out of the wind?
Let's do that, because among other things, you're shirtless.
Yeah, so I like to keep moving.
The journey down was uneventful. Interestingly, if there hadn't been snow, it might have been a lot more difficult for us. We just followed our footprints, and we were back down in, I don't know exactly how long it was because we weren't looking at our watches. But the total journey, the total time on foot, was somewhere between 3.5 and 4 hours. We covered something like 4.6 miles, we reckoned, and, we climbed 1,500 feet and descended it again.
So, Tony, you led us up. Look at this. There's nothing to see here. It's just forest. You led us up to the top of the mountain. I gave you a couple pointers here and there, but you just took us straight to the top of a mountain where you can't see anything but tangled forest. So I think it was a successful natural navigation exercise.
It was highly successful, and I wanted to do this. I wanted to just do something where I stop talking to other people who test themselves and just do something that tested me a little bit. I don't think I could have done that without your help there, though. You've been on this before.
You would not want to advise anybody to wander out into the woods without a compass or GPS on a bushwhack for the first time ever. So I was there, as a backup. But I think what you saw is that if you pay attention and have a rough plan, it's not as daunting. It wasn't as hard as it might have been. But without paying attention and without a plan, one could have panicked and wandered off anywhere and still be out there.
That can happen. People can get lost in the Catskills, particularly when bushwhacking. Maybe there'll be a future episode about survival skills. For now, though, call it trekking without tech, or natural navigation, or even minimal mountaineering. Any which way, it was mission accomplished. It was time to get back into our cars and go off to our jobs, which would inevitably involve technology. I'll just end up by saying, you know what, we pulled that off perfectly. Thank you for your guidance.
Thank you.
We're in a great place.
Good.
We're back at lunchtime, and have yourself a wonderful day.
Thank you, Tony. Same
Great.
to you.
All right, thank you, Ken. Bye-bye. You can find Ken Posner on the web at his blog, thelongbrownpath.com, where you will find many an excellent article about his various outdoor adventures and philosophies. You can also find links there to buy his book, Running the Long Path, and we'll put all of these in the show notes, along with a few other resources that Ken has recommended for us. This episode of One Step Beyond was written, produced and narrated by Tony Fletcher. Incidental music in this episode was Revealed in This Nature by Noel Fletcher. The theme song One Step Beyond is by Madness, used with their permission, and the logo is by Mark Lerner. You can reach out to us at onestepbeyond@ijamming.net, IJAMMING.net. You can also find us on all social media. Just search One Step Beyond Podcast, and our website is buried over at acast.com. All these links will be supplied in the show notes. And if you are listening online, please know that you can subscribe and download on just about every podcast platform known to man. It's always great if you want to leave a positive review, and it's especially great if you want to reach out. Whatever you're doing in the world, peace.